Right. So today we're talking about nature's soil builders. And probably some of you were not on that, but about a month or two ago, I did a thing on mycorrhizae, and the cover crops fits perfectly with that. It is funny how, well, it's the soil food web and it all interacts together. So anyway, so what are cover crops? Cover crops are not grown to sell or for a harvest or to eat. I guess some of them you may be able to use them secondarily like that, but that's not what they're grown for. They're grown to stay in the garden and protect our soil. So these plants are grown to protect the soil from erosion and that sort of thing, also to suppress weeds, to retain moisture, but they also improve the soil and increase the organic matter and long-term fertility. And then hopefully in the long run, it'll help to reduce fertilizer needs. And that depends sometimes on what type of cover crops you use, how much fertilizer or nitrogen that you are provided with. Okay, organic matter. That's what we all want in our soil. So organic matter is essentially made up, can be made up of a cover crop. So why does all of this matter? Well, first of all, if we remember from that last program about mycorrhizae, if you've done any studying this, our soil is a living soil. It's alive with all types of microbes and fungi and also organic matter. And it's constantly, these live things in there are constantly moving around and breaking down and creating new soil and creating pore spaces and all of that sort of things, but it's constantly going on. And organic matter continually decomposes. So eventually you do have to replenish it. And that's the reason for our cover crop. We're helping not only to protect it from erosion and suppress weeds, but we're also helping to give it more organic matter for those little microbes to chomp on. So, and here we are with the mycorrhizae down at the bottom. You can see we have the bacteria, and in the soil, also if you have a legume, say clover or something like that, they have those little nodules, they're fixing nitrogen, but you also have those mycorrhizae from other fungi that are like a fine root system that work in tandem with the roots of the plant. So all of this works together to improve the nutrient cycling and to build the soil structure. And in the long run, all of this means that you're increasing plant resilience. So what do they do for the soil? All these little microbes, and that picture right there is actually microbes in the soil. It's from a lab there, but that is magnified. I don't know how long, but we never think of our soil actually looking like that. But if you have a good, healthy soil, hopefully your soil does look like that. And so what do all these little guys over here do? They help recycle the nutrients, any kind of fertilizer or anything that you put on your soil. They help to break it down and put it in a form where the plant can take it up and use it. They also help to build the soil structure. They in turn support plant health, boost fertility, and as we said, they form those partnerships with each other. So they're just not working alone. They're also working in partnership with other fungi and bacteria and also with the roots of the plants to ensure that the plant is growing as healthy as it can. Excuse me. So how cover crops, legumes, and mycorrhizae all interact to improve our soil. First of all, they have the root systems. Fine roots of cover crops absorb excess moisture. They also help stabilize the soil, which prevents erosion. And there we go. And also, if you use legumes, the clover, vetch, and any other legumes like that, they the atmospheric nitrogen through their little nodules. And you can see a little nodule right here. And actually, if you pull up sometimes clover or something like that, you are able to actually see those little nodules, and they're nitrogen fixing. And then that naturally enriches the soil. All right, our mycorrhizae, which we're seeing an example in that top picture there, the cover crops actually help to boost the beneficial fungi that creates these little mycorrhizae. And they, in turn, form a symbiotic relationship with the plant roots. And so that not only is there an exchange going on between nutrients, but also it widens the root system of the plants. Okay, and all of this takes place with something called glomalin. This is a plant fungal glycoprotein, and it helps to bind the soil particles, improving the soil structure and stability. And then the mycorrhiza networks take all of this improvement and that sort of thing and increase water and nutrient absorption between the plant and the roots. So the types of cover crops that you can find, you can always do legumes, as we said. Those are nitrogen fixing. Grasses and rye, which are rye, oat, or grasses and grains, which are rye and oats and that sort of thing, are brassicas, which normally we think of those as in our garden, but include radish and mustard and broadleaf herbs and other broadleaves such as buckwheat. And you can see in the picture, we have the legumes with their nodules. Of course, the grasses and grains have an extensive root system that helps go down through the soil and create more pore spaces and break up the soil, as do the brassicas, although mustard does have a sort of allelopathic property where it can keep the soil from having things that might harm the plant in it. And then, of course, our buckwheat here, while it is, it'll provide that material needed to for compost once you dig it in, but it also provides flowers and that sort of thing for pollinators, and also, or not as more important, but just as important for our insects that prey on the harmful insects. So you see, actually, you see a little ladybug there. So that buckwheat especially provides a place for those types of insects to be. And the more diversity you have and the more good insects you have around, the better for your garden. So remember, legumes add nitrogen, non-legumes protect and condition the soil. So that's a good general rule to think about. All right, now there is nothing that says you can't mix your cover crop together. And in fact, if you mix a legume and one of the others, like the grasses or whatever, that you get a double whammy there, and it's sort of more complete working together there. As we know that the legumes, they're fixing the nitrogen, but their very best job that they do is improving soil nutrients and preparing the beds for heavy feeding crops like tomatoes and corn. So if you've got your crop rotation plan going, and you know that in a certain area of your garden you're going to be growing corn for next year, or maybe you just harvested corn from there, or tomatoes, you probably would want to consider adding a legume to the mix of your cover crop, because it will help increase those soil nutrients that were taken away by the plant growing through the summer, or getting it ready for the next growing season. The grasses and grains, and here I believe, I want to say that top one is ryegrass, and this one is oats. But as far as a cover crop goes, you wouldn't necessarily, necessarily let it go to seed. You may not want it to go to seed and then, you have all those seeds, which produces another crop, or you may. It just depends on where it is in the growth system once it gets started. But they provide erosion control. Their big root masses, which they have, help to stabilize the soil. They also suppress weeds by shading out and out competing the weeds. Uh, they scavenge any leftover nutrients that may be in your soil, uh, which will prevent nutrients from leaching out over the winter. And they add that all important organic matter and improve soil tilth when they're tilled under or left to decompose. So, but they're best for holding soil over the winter and adding long-term organic matter. Now, our brassicas, we consider them our natural soil tillers. They have deep tap roots that help break up that soil. In the soil layers, there's things like, as you see here, that top one is actually a radish, and it is 16 inches long. If you cannot see that on your slide, but I can see it. So but it looks like half of it was out of the soil. So that what they call bio-drilled. It bio-drilled down into the soil looks like about 8 to maybe 10 inches there. So that's pretty good, helping to break up that soil, but also creating pathways for water and that sort of thing to be stored or to drain. They improve that water infiltration and root penetration for future crops. They also help control pests and diseases because some of them, and especially like the mustard, they will release a natural biofumigant. It's something they release, and pests and some diseases don't like it. They will not go toward that. And then because they go way down into the soil, and when they're way down into the soil, this radish here has fine root hairs all up and down it for the most part. So it's also capturing the nutrients from deep down into the soil that normally maybe your plant, those soil roots don't reach deep down there like that, but these do, and they help to bring those nutrients up once you turn it over and it decomposes. So, but they are good for breaking up hard pans, and a hard pan is like where you have clay underneath your soil, and I certainly do where I live. And sometimes they will form almost a barrier there in your soil to keep it from going any further, like a fragipan or hard pans. And this will help to break those up. Of course, it loosens the soil, and it will help to reduce those soil-borne pests. Okay. Now, our broadleaves here, we have, what is it called? Buckwheat. Buckwheat at the top. And then down here at the bottom, it's actually a creeping thyme that they have there. I never really thought of creeping thyme and other herbs as cover crops. But after I heard a speaker not too long ago talk about it, and then after doing some of the research for this, I realized that you can use that, and with good reason, because they grow rapidly and they have weed suppression. Okay. A lot of times with the buckwheat, it's through that allelopathy, which means they exude a certain type of, what do we call it in the other slide? A biofumigant, or some type of substance that discourages other plants around it from growing. So that's great if you're trying to suppress weeds. It'll suppress them from growing so that the buckwheat is able to grow and do its best. With the creeping thyme here and that sort of thing, they just cover thickly and will suppress, have something over top of a weed. They'll grow out and get thick before the weeds even think about sprouting, hopefully. They also are easily decomposable, so they're giving that decomposable organic matter back to the soil. Uh, as with the deep roots that are brassicas and things that go deeply into the soil and bring up some of those nutrients that were held deep in the soil, these also help to scavenge phosphorus and make it more available to the plants. And then, of course, as I said, it serves as an excellent smother crop between plantings or in idle garden beds. So if you had a garden and you said, this year we're going to let that rest and we're going to move over here and do a garden over here, you could actually leave these there and they will serve as a smother crop, not only a cover crop, but a smother crop to keep all of the plantings out. Also, with the buckwheat, they serve as pollinators. So again, your pollinators love them. The beneficial insects will live there. So you're increasing the population by providing habitat for those types of insects to live. So that's their short-term best for, is that they will attract beneficial insects and pollinators. So let's think about this. Cool season options. A couple of weeks ago, we had Ken Clayton here and talking about our lawn. And when we talk about lawns, we always talk about cool season grasses and warm season grasses. Well, our cover crops are just the same. We have some cool season cover crops that you would be planting now, because they are planted in the fall and they are able to grow through the winter. The really colder temperatures, they are able to continue to grow throughout there. And these are things like cereal rye, winter wheat, oats, hairy vetch, and crimson clover. So from this list, if you wanted to combine the best of both worlds, you could get say a winter wheat and combine it with the crimson clover. So you're not only getting all of the erosion proof and the roots down there holding the soil and all of that sort of thing, but you're also getting the clover that is fixing nitrogen. So you got the double shot there. Now, common warm season options, these are planted in the summer between crops, but they do die out in the winter. So if you have a plot of land that's going to be resting for a while, or you're waiting to plant, say, a fall garden in it, you've planted it throughout the spring, but now those are sort of it's getting too hot for them, but you will be planting a fall garden, then that's when you would want to plant your common warm season options here. You could also leave them there as planted between the crop rows if you would like, because they will grow and suppress weeds, and some of them, and then they die out in the winter. Well, now, buckwheat, cowpeas, and Sudan grass, which I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe this picture here is the Sudan grass, which is in the molasses and that sort of thing family, I want to say. But anyway, it is also will help suppress the weeds through allelopathy. So let's say this fall, we've decided we're going to plant a cover crop. We have decided we're going to look for a mixed bag, or a mixed seeding with a legume and also with maybe a cereal crop or the grain crop or something like that, or maybe even one of the broadleaf ones that are good for the pollinators and beneficial insects. So you begin in the fall immediately after your vegetable harvest. You want to go ahead and remove weeds and plant debris first. And you might say, okay, why are we removing especially plant debris from this when we're adding a cover crop to go ahead and be able to work that into the soil to provide compost? Doesn't plant debris do that as well? Well, it does. But sometimes in our gardens, and I know this year, there's different crops respond differently all throughout the year. But a lot of times, if you've had trouble with pests or if you've had trouble with fungal diseases, those diseases and pests will overwinter in either the plant debris or the weeds around the area. And so if you just sort of till it back into the soil, you are giving that disease or pest or whatever a chance to overwinter right there in the garden patch and then come up and be ready to munch or ready to affect the plants that you plant next spring. You want to make sure that you sow seeds at least 4 weeks before cold weather. Now it's like, okay, what's cold weather? I would say probably you do want to get it in there before frost. Here in central Kentucky, our first frost is generally around the last of October. I think as we go westerly, it may sort of crossover into maybe early November, something like that. And then if we go east, it could be a little earlier than that. So you want to use that as a good guide. And then you just follow the seeding directions for broadcast rates. And generally, when you do buy cover crop, they will have a broadcast rate for, how many seeds do you throw down per 100 square feet or 1,000 square feet, or even in some cases, how many per acre, that sort of thing. You do need to keep it watered and then just let it go and watch it grow. But you do want to make sure you get it in early enough that it gets a growing start before it gets too cold. Now, for our spring and summer crops, this is going to be between crops in your garden, between the early spring garden and the late season crops. And I sort of touched on that when we were talking about the creeping time. But again, you just broadcast the seed, rake it lightly, and then water, and then watch it grow. And it does say many seed mixes are available for beginners to simplify planting. And those would just be seeds. I mean, it's a pretty simple process, but I guess here that would mean that these are plants or seeds that probably germinate a little easier and can have a little error rate. Error, ERROR, my southernness is taken over there, but many seed mixes are available for beginners. So they take out that rate of if you're going to make a mistake. Okay, let's say we've grown it throughout the winter and they're actually starting to die down a little bit, or maybe they're not, but you're ready to start working your garden. What you want to do is mow it, till it. And now I do know that, we've said the least amount of tilling, the better, which is true. But in this case, you can mow it, you can till it in or crimp it. And generally crimping means you just sort of flatten it out onto the garden before seeds mature. Like we saw the oats there that had already formed heads and that sort of thing. You probably don't want it to go that way. You want to get it before any of the seeds start to mature. You can turn it over with a fork. In the picture to the left, you can see there's a fork there. You want to wait 2 to 3 weeks before you plant any vegetables, and that'll give the cover crop a chance to start to break down and that sort of thing. But if you say, I think I want to try this no-till. I don't want to harm my soil structure. I want to try the no-till. Well, then you cut the grasses or what right at the soil level, and then you leave the roots in place. And then from there, it's like, well, if you want to compost the top part of it, you can. But for the no-till, you would cut it at soil level, leave the roots, and then plant the seeds in that. Okay, now this is a list that came out of, There we go. That came out of Extension, University of Kentucky Extension publication, AGR 240. It's an example of the plant species used as cover crops. And so you see here, it's got listing of a good amount of cover crops here. But what I like about it, of course, it tells you what family they fall in. Are they a brassica? Are they a legume? Are they a grass? But uh, over here at the very end, it will tell you these are well suited for fall planting. It sort of takes the guesswork work out of it, and it tells you fibrous root system holds the soil together. Winter wheat, fall planting. If you have the fragipan soil or a hard pan there, you may want to go with annual ryegrass because it has the potential for improving that. Also, our brassicas, the daikon radish, large taproot, that sort of thing. Of course, that is a cool season as well. So in turnips will alleviate some of the soil compaction if that's your problem. And then, of course, the crimson clover and the hairy vetch are legumes that affix nitrogen from the air. And so they also provide some minimal weed suppression. Okay. Now, one word of caution, though, with some of these, and maybe not so much with, crimson clover, white clover, and the hairy vetch, sometimes they can be a little difficult to terminate. And also, when you start pricing some of these seeds, those are fairly high priced seeds. Okay, so here's some tips for success. Remember, you want to match your crop to your season and goals. So, we need a cool season for fall. We need a warm season grass for growing between time during the summer gardening time between early spring and fall. Also, if you think, I really need this area right here is compacted, I really need to break that up some, then you want to consider some of your brassicas that help to do that. Also, you want to prevent reseeding. So, because if you don't prevent the reseeding and you allow them to reseed and they become a bother in your garden, well, then they've just become weeds and not a beneficial cover crop. So try as you can not to let them reseed. Again, as I said, you want to mix those legumes and grasses for multiple benefits. And even the smallest bed will benefit. I this year have some new raised beds that I'm working with. So I think I'm going to plant some cover crops even in my raised beds, which can be done.